Now, I promised you that we'd be getting greasy in this, our second episode of Low Budget Garage, and we will. But first, John will be preparing the front clip for disassembly. He'll be hitting every nut and bolt with lubricant, finding each hidden fastener that holds parts together, breaking free 30 years of grime and rust. John will spend a lot of time doing this, but save his knuckles in the process. So let's follow along as John explains what he's doing on Low Budget Garage.
This section here shows the connection between the steering column and the steering box. And it's mainly about looking at the bolts. Now this brush here is a wire brush. It's fairly large. It's helpful for large areas to clean. I've got a smaller one here, and I use these wire brushes to clean the dirt and grime off of the nuts before I start to disassemble. So you basically just rub through, eliminating as much of the dirt and grime as you can, so that you can see. Sometimes there's so much dirt over the years it cakes up you can't even see where the bolt heads are, and you can't get a wrench on it. So this helps you to see all the detail that you need, and it makes it easier to get your bolts loosened. Now this little one helps to get in between the little cracks in there, squeeze it in there, and eliminate a few burrs. Sometimes you'll find some nuts and bolts that you haven't seen or didn't realize were in there. I'm just moving along to the fittings for the hoses.
Now, John, did you spray WD-40 on these little things before you started cleaning them off?
Yes, I did. It helps to break up the material as well.
And the wrenches that you've got there?
These are just, that's an open end wrench. The other end was a box wrench. This is a box wrench. It encases the nut head, so it makes it a lot stronger when you go to pull on that. So I'm just fitting some wrench ends on there so that I can try to separate these two. I've got to hold both ends in the nut. Now you can't, a lot of these bolts on the car, you can't just pull on one bolt, but there'll be another nut on the other end there that'll spin, so you have to, like you can see here, I'm tightening up.
Oh yeah, now that allows you to apply a lot more torque too, doesn't it?
Yes, I can pull against the wrenches. I can fight against one another. Now here,
now John, I noticed that you turned the wrench a different direction than you had it when you first placed it down.
Yeah, just give me better leverage in that direction. And you can see here it actually worked better because I can take the nut off.
Oh yeah.
And there are two different size nuts on that steering linkage, so you have to be careful not to get those confused. Make sure you reassemble the bolts as soon as you get it apart. Now here on the chassis, again, I'm just going to show you some more areas that need to be cleaned up. Again, the wire brush really comes in handy.
And once again, you hit all of these with your WD-40.
Yeah, a lot of them. Some on the frame here you can see aren't cleaned up with any WD because they weren't rusted. Really, that WD helps with the rust. With the dirt, it's not an issue, so you wouldn't have to worry about it as much. But I like to hit most of them with that WD. It'll help cut through the dirt and the rust as well. And it really does make a difference. I mean, you can try breaking loose a rusty bolt and break the head right off the bolt. But if you spray some of that penetrating fluid, it'll soak into the threads and eat away at that rust, and it really does. Within 10 minutes, you're ready to take it off.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
So here I'm working on the brake lines, and actually this is the fuel line. But it's attached to the frame. I have to get this off before I disassemble the subframe from the rest of the body.
So are you planning on reusing that brake line?
Yeah, as much as possible.
Yeah,
you know, again, it's, you know, I can't afford to go buy all new stuff, so.
Right. So in other words, had you missed those two bolts and you disassembled it, you would have snapped that that line right in two, huh?
Yeah, it would have destroyed it. And they're pretty flimsy. If you bend them too far, they'll just fold.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can see here I'm holding the wrench, the back side of the ratchet. It helps me to keep it on the nut as I'm ratcheting back and forth. Otherwise, it wants to fall off. So I hold the back side, and then I just move the ratchet between my fingers, and it goes much faster.
Oh, that's the key. That's why I'm always having problems with my lawnmower.
Yeah, just little things that help, speed up your work. And you can see here it's been loosened from the chassis. So I'm putting the bolts back into the chassis now so I don't lose them, and I know exactly where they go.
Oh, that's neat.
Always a good idea.
Yeah. I'm terrible about that kind of stuff.
Well, it's just after I've lost so many nuts and bolts,
yeah,
I've learned.
Yeah. So what's that little line, that little wire?
That's the ground wire. Connects the chassis to the body. It's just used for grounding. Most of the electrical system has to be grounded to the chassis. This grounds the body to that. So when you ground the radiator, when you ground the radio, you're just screwing to the body, but that's been grounded to the chassis, and the chassis is grounded to the battery. So
exactly.
you're just making a solid connection.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that's something you want to make sure you reconnect back up to your frame from the subframe.
Definitely, yes. And a lot of chassis also have a ground line that goes to the block. So
yeah. So
now we're looking underneath the car. There are some straps that I have to disassemble on that fuel line that are mounted to the subframe right underneath the body, and you can see those two straps there. So what I'm doing is just unscrew those and remove them so that I can separate that whole sub-chassis. They're not easy to find, but use your wire brush, you'll be able to locate those, and next thing you know, the whole line is separated. Also, you can see up here the main body mount that goes into the chassis. So that bolt's pretty heavy duty, and it's got rubber grommets that stabilize and isolate the body from the frame.
Oh, there's another one right there.
Yeah, one in the back. So there's 4 total. 2 in the front you can get to at the engine compartment, but these 2 in the back you definitely have to crawl underneath.
Now, I'm assuming there's a good reason they didn't just go ahead and weld those.
Well, yeah, I don't know what it is exactly, but I know you could pull that whole thing out.
Well, I'll tell you, it would have been a lot more difficult to change your sub-clips out, wouldn't it, if it had been?
Yeah, I know. And I'm not sure what the thinking was back then on these subframes, but it sure is nice to be able to pull that whole section out, and you can work on your suspension, you can work on the motor and tranny, and none of the body's around it. So here I'm loosening those big bolts, and I've got a pretty big size socket on this.
Yeah.
I think it's somewhere around a 15/16 socket on that, and my ratchet's a pretty strong, it's I think 1/2 inch. You have to really crank on those. Sometimes you might have to use a breaker bar, or if I don't have one with me, I just add a piece of pipe to the end of my ratchet wrench.
And the reason that gives you more torque?
Yeah, the leverage. You're able to pull from further out, and you don't have to pull as hard because of that leverage, and that definitely...
that looks pretty rusty.
Yeah, it's rotted through. I'm surprised it even hold the chassis on there. So now I got to move down to the back.
Now you're going to be replacing all of those worn bushings.
Yes, all brand new.
Yeah.
I'll probably replace them with what they call polyurethane bushings, or graphite impregnated polyurethane.
As opposed to rubber.
Right. They're much stronger. They'll last longer. The graphite ones help to keep them from squeaking, but much stronger than the original rubber. Unless you're going to restore it, but I'm not, so I'm going to make some.
Now, when you say restore it, does that mean you would want to go with what they originally used?
Yes. You would definitely want to buy the original rubbers. Even though they're not as good, restoring a car means replacing every device, every unit, every piece that's originally designed the way it was.
Right. Now, that would be for car shows?
Yeah.
Okay.
If this car was worth something when I first bought it, I would probably restore it and it would be worth a lot more money. You can see right here I'm disassembling the last bolt, and the chassis, the subframe, is actually going to separate from the body. I've taken the time to put some drop right there.
It looks like it just fell.
Yeah.
Well, I can see. So those jacks you put underneath there, there's an important reason for doing that.
Yeah, I spent some time in there. You could see I propped them in there. I kicked them, made sure they were solid before I crawled under there.
Yeah.
And now I can pull that subframe straight out from the body and keep that supported.